Welcome to the Monarch Business School Podcast, your gateway to exploring today's complex management issues. Stay tuned for insights that shape the leaders of tomorrow. Today's podcast focuses on women's leadership in Africa. Sit back and enjoy.
Ever get the feeling like, are we really still having this conversation? Less than 10%. Can you believe that? Of all the Fortune 500 CEOs, less than 10% are women.
It's 2024. You'd think.
Exactly. But here's where things get interesting. We're seeing a completely different story playing out in Africa.
Yeah, it's really quite something.
So we're diving headfirst into a brand new report from the Monarch African Research Institute.
Oh, I was just reading that.
It's hot off the press, and it's all about women shattering those glass ceilings in African leadership. And I want to be clear, this deep dive isn't just a look how far we've come kind of thing. It's about understanding the nuances, the challenges, the triumphs, the whole picture. What's really going on? What does it mean for the rest of the world?
Absolutely. And the report does a great job, actually, of acknowledging those complexities. There's this undeniable upward trend of women stepping into leadership roles, but it's not this, perfectly linear success story. It varies wildly across different countries and industries.
Right. It's this fascinating, intricate landscape. And there's one stat that just leaped out at me. Rwanda, their parliament, over 60% women. Wow. 60%. It's mind-blowing when you compare it to the global average, which is stuck like way back at about 25%. Makes you wonder, what are they doing differently over there in Rwanda?
That's the million-dollar question.
What can we learn from them?
And it's a question worth keeping in mind because this whole idea of uneven progress, it's not just an African story. It reflects what's happening globally with women and leadership. And I think that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating, how those unique cultural and socioeconomic factors in Africa, they kind of intertwine with these broader global trends. And it's not all celebratory. The report doesn't shy away from digging into those roadblocks, the stuff that's really holding women back.
Yeah, it's definitely more complicated than just saying, oh, there's a glass ceiling.
Way more. The report actually breaks it down into three main challenges. You've got these deeply ingrained cultural norms, then the workplace bias that never seems to go away.
Right.
And then top it all off with the work-life balance struggle, which, let's be honest, affects everyone, but often lands way harder on women.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And each of these, I imagine, plays out differently depending on where you are geographically, what industry you're in.
Totally. It's not one size fits all, which is, I think, why this report's so valuable. They get into the specifics. For example, they talk about how in some cultures, there's this almost taboo feeling around women leading. Well, it's like it challenges these deeply rooted power structures that have been around for generations. Oh. Just imagine. In those contexts, even daring to dream about a leadership role, it can put women at odds with their own communities, even their families.
Like they're facing pushback from every direction.
Exactly. And while those cultural nuances, they're specific to certain regions and communities, I think those tensions between tradition and ambition, that's something that plays out globally, wouldn't you say? It's just that in many African nations, those cultural norms, they carry extra weight. They create these really tangible obstacles for women.
Right. It's one thing to intellectually recognize the bias.
Yeah.
But when it's so deeply ingrained in the culture.
Absolutely.
And then on top of all of that, you layer on the workplace bias.
Exactly.
It's almost like...
Oh, don't even get me started. The double standards. It's unbelievable. There's this one study the report cites. It found that women in leadership were often labeled bossy, or aggressive for behaviors that if they were men, it would have been assertive or decisive.
The classic double standard. I swear, it never really goes away.
No.
You touched on this earlier, but it's not just about these individual experiences, right? Yeah. This has these huge ripple effects.
Huge. I mean, think about it. When women are held back by these totally outdated biases, it's the entire continent that pays the price. You're talking about this incredible, untapped potential, missed opportunities for economic growth.
Right.
And it just slows everything down. Gender equality. I mean, it's not just about getting women into those positions. It's about changing the systems and the structures that create those inequalities.
These are lots, right?
It is. It's complex.
But the report doesn't leave you hanging on a pessimistic note. In fact, it's full of these amazing stories about women in Africa who are breaking those barriers, defying the odds, and just absolutely killing it in leadership roles.
That's what I liked about it. It doesn't just lay out the problems. It digs into the solutions, the successes.
And not just individual success stories, but whole initiatives, organizations popping up to support the next generation of female leaders.
Right.
One thing that really stood out to me was this whole emphasis on networks. And I'm not talking about like your LinkedIn feed, I'm talking about groups like AWLM.
The African Women Leaders Network.
Yeah, exactly. And new faces, new voices. These aren't just, get together and chat kind of things. They're giving women the specific tools and support they need to thrive in leadership.
You got it. It's about targeted mentorship, access to funding, which is huge, and just that sense of community, knowing you're not alone in facing these challenges.
Because it can be so isolating.
Right.
Especially when you go up against those deeply ingrained societal norms.
Absolutely. And they're making real strides. AWM, for instance, they've been instrumental in pushing for policy changes that promote gender equality in the workplace.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, one of their recent campaigns, it actually led to increased parental leave provisions in 3 different countries.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's tangible change.
It's not just about like changing laws on paper. It's about shifting the whole mindset.
Exactly. And that actually ties into another big theme of their report, education. And again, not just any education, but programs specifically designed to equip women with those leadership skills for today's world.
It makes sense. The skills you need to run a tech startup aren't the same as what you needed, even 10 years ago.
Exactly. They highlight the African Leadership University. They've got this fantastic program, and they're laser focused on things like strategic thinking, financial literacy, negotiation tactics.
Giving women the tools.
The tools and the confidence to lead, and not just lead, but excel in whatever field they choose.
It's brilliant. So it's kind of twofold, right? Changing minds and giving women the skills to step into those roles.
Absolutely. And that brings us to why this all matters. Why should our listeners care about this? Because this isn't just an African story. This is about the future of leadership, period.
It's about time we stop thinking about it like, oh, those women over there, and more like, this is the blueprint for how we should all be approaching leadership.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the report makes such a strong case for gender diversity. It's not just a box to tick or something nice to do. It's a competitive advantage.
So explain that. What's the connection there?
Study after study shows that companies with more women in leadership, they just perform better. They're more profitable, more innovative, and way better at understanding and responding to a diverse customer base.
So it's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do.
100%. Because men and women, we often bring different perspectives, different approaches to solving problems, different leadership styles. And in a world that's constantly changing, that diversity of thought, it's invaluable.
And this takes us all the way back to Rwanda. Remember that stat about their parliament? Over 60% women.
Incredible.
Now, of course, correlation doesn't equal causation, but it does make you think. They've got this incredible representation of women in leadership. And guess what? They've also experienced this remarkable economic boom in recent years.
It's definitely something to consider. Could their commitment to female leadership be part of what's driving their success? It's a question worth exploring.
It really is. We've covered a lot in this deep dive, from the systemic barriers to the stories of incredible resilience, the innovative solutions, and the immense potential that's waiting to be unlocked. And, as we wrap up, the report really focuses on women in those formal leadership positions, the CEOs, the parliamentarians. But it got me thinking, what about the everyday leadership of women within their communities? Those stories, their influence, their strength. It feels like those narratives hold a wealth of insights too. But that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. If you're interested in going even deeper on any of this, we'll have the full report linked in our show notes. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Monarch Podcast. This has been a production of Monarch Business School Switzerland, Europe's leading business and leadership school for practicing managers focused on online management education to over 90 countries around the world. Find Monarch Business School Switzerland at monarch.ch. Return in the future for more podcasts highlighting management issues for the 21st century. This podcast is covered by copyright. UGSM Monarch Business School, GmbH 2024.